Now, this may seem counterintuitive, but I actually think the more detail that we put into our music, the easier it is to play. If you like this video, be sure to hit the like button so I know that you're enjoying this kind of content. And if you learned something and think somebody else you know could benefit from this, then be sure to share it with them. And if you want more clarinet and music sort of tips and tricks each and every week, then be sure to subscribe to this channel. So what I mean by adding more detail to the music is that instead of just sort of playing through the notes, to really add in exactly the precise rhythm, the dynamics, the articulations, and any other sort of musical details that may be in there, thinking about the phrasing, all of that good stuff. And this may seem sort of counterintuitive because usually when you're playing, you can sort of only focus on the notes and only get the notes to start with, at least. And that's totally true and makes sense. And if we look at the psychological principle of working memory, then that does become an issue. Working memory tells us that our brains are only capable of really dealing with about 7 things at one time. So if you're thinking about the notes, dynamics, articulations, phrasing, rhythm, that's already 5 things for just one note. So once you have 2 notes in a measure, then you're over your working memory load to sort of grasp all of those things at the same time. And that's totally true when we're learning a piece. We're not able to sight read through something and get the notes, rhythms, dynamics, articulations, all of that musical detail in there when we're just sight reading through it. But I think for actually learning a piece and actually performing it and feeling really confident when you're performing, I think we can really benefit from actually adding in more of those details. When we're learning a piece or when we're sight reading, it's totally true that we're working off of that working memory and we're needing each of those details is like taking up a spot in our working memory. But I think the power of those details in actually building more confidence and being able to more easily play a piece comes from layering those things together. It's virtually impossible to think about playing and be focused on getting the right rhythm and focused on getting the right notes and the right dynamics and all of that stuff. Just like a piano player, it's virtually impossible for them to think about their left hand doing one thing and their right hand doing another thing. If you play piano or you have dabbled in playing piano, you know that when you're playing both hands together, you're not thinking of the left hand doing something and the right hand doing something different. They're not separated. You're actually thinking about how they go together and how they're connected and sort of layering it together. That's the same thing that we have to do with all of the musical details, is layer them together into one thing. So then when we look at a note, we're not just seeing a note and a rhythm and a dynamic and an articulation, but all of those things sort of come together to be that one particular note. So let me explain how I imagine this working in our brains so you can see why this is so powerful for us to use. From my incredibly basic understanding of how our brains and minds work, it's basically the little synapses, little connections that come together to sort of build a movement or a muscle memory or an action or a thought. So if we're looking at our music and we're playing one note, say we have a B that we're gonna play, thinking about it as a B, naming the note as a B, that adds one layer to our sort of highway that we're building in our head. That muscle memory has B, that's one connection there. Now, if we add that B is a 16th note on beat 3, then that adds another connection. If we add that it's accented, that's another. We can add that it's the top of a scale and then you start coming down after that. We can add that it's forte. We can add that it's the peak of the phrase. We can add maybe a particular fingering that we're using for that particular B. So each time we add another detail to the music, then that adds another connection, another synapses firing. And that's how we sort of start to layer these things together so that that one note, rather than just being an arbitrary B that has that one little weak connection that could easily fire off a C or a D or something else, instead we're layering on more meaning to that note and coding it in our brain so that there's more triggers for that note. And they're all sort of working together to be that one particular note rather than any other random note that it could possibly be. By adding all of those connections and layering all of that meaning together for that one particular note, it gives our brain more to grab and will actually allow us to play it without taking up as much working memory space. So now that we've sort of connected everything together and built it into that one note, instead of having our working memory looking at the note, the rhythm, the dynamics, the articulations, all of that stuff, and filling up a slot in our working memory for each of those, it actually only has to grab one of those details and everything else will sort of come with it. So we're building those details together, layering them together so that one note has its own special meaning, so that as we're actually playing through the piece, our working memory only has to grab one detail as we're going. We can think, oh, this is the top of the scale, and we'll automatically accent it, play it forte, make it the peak of the phrase, put it in the right spot rhythmically. Or we could also think like, this is where it goes in the rhythm and all the other stuff will come. Or we'll think this is the accented note and that stuff will come. So instead of having to have everything separated, we're sort of building it together, creating more of those connections in our brain so that when we're performing, we're not panicking, trying to jump back and forth and switch our attention between all of the different details that we need to get. But instead, we have the things built together, and all we have to do is maybe think about the rhythm as we're going, and everything else will sort of fall in place. Or we can think about the phrasing as we're going, and everything will fall into place. Now, of course, this is a little bit easier said than done. As you're learning a piece, it's going to be very much all in the working memory and you're sort of having to pick up what is happening. But as we build these connections and layer these connections together, that's when you start to really feel like things are in your muscle memory. When you're able to play through a piece in a performance where you're like sort of like blacked out and you don't even know what's happening in the performance, but you're still playing it well, that's because you've built all of those connections and all of those layers, and your brain knows what each individual note means. So for your actual practicing, the way that you're going to practice so that you can build up these connections is, number one, make sure that you're looking at all of those details. As early in the learning process as possible, go for the dynamics, the phrasing, the articulation, the alternate fingerings, figuring out what's happening in the phrase and the shape of the notes and the contour of the line. Go for as many of those details as you can. Start building them together, layering them together in your practice, and then you're going to be so much more confident when you're performing. I can almost guarantee that the professional players probably spend a lot more time than you think considering how they want each individual note to go. If you really take that time to figure out what each note means, all of the detail that you want on each and every note and how that moves from the previous note and to the next note, then you're going to be in really good shape. And again, I know that may seem like a ton of work and it's like it's going to take a lot of time, but it actually pays off a lot really quickly. When you build up those connections, they start to build up really fast and start working for you and actually using the full power of your brain rather than just sort of going over the same thing over and over and stumbling through it and trying to do too much music and all of that stuff. So I hope this video helps you to understand that if you really go in for those details, take a piece apart sort of note by note and really figure out the meaning, figure out how to code it into your brain with those different layers and make as many connections as you can, then it's going to make it so much easier when it comes performance time, and you're going to start sounding like a real professional. Alright, if you liked this video, be sure to hit that like. If you learned something, share it. If you want more tips and tricks, then subscribe to the channel. And thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and I will see you in another video.